Hey, here in my backyard. People always ask me for a tour. If you guys get the reference to that, please comment down below. Today we are talking about business. That's why I started it out like that. Dixie, what are you doing? You going crazy? We're talking about how I started my reptile business. Now I want to say that this is not a blueprint for anyone. This is just my particular case. And listen, I took a lot of risk. A lot of risk was involved. I don't recommend it to anyone. Also, keep in mind that your journey is going to be different from mine. Also, I'm not a full-time breeder, but I do make enough to where if I had another full-time occupation, I could at least get a good vacation out of it, so take it under that context. Otherwise, we were trying to go above there, but that's where we are right at this moment. So please, I hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you don't get it twisted as far as, obviously the animals come first before business, so all of that money stuff that I'm gonna talk about in here, you know, that's not the first thing I'm thinking about, but it's good to know, and I want people to know that it's possible if you're just willing to put in the hard work and willing to sacrifice, and also you just keep on going. You got to have a level of resilience when it comes to this kind of thing, so enjoy my story. So reptiles have always been a part of my life, starting with bringing a corn snake to show and tell in first grade, all the way to keeping iguanas, water dragons, bearded dragons, different things, because my dad was into it also. So he used to bring me to the White Plains show when I was young, probably late 90s, early 2000s. And that's kind of where I got my first glimpse of the reptile hobby, I guess you could say. And then from there, I actually, in high school, I kind of stopped paying attention to the whole reptile thing and got distracted by all the things that high school kids do get distracted by. And then in college, when I went away, we still had our corn snake at home. His name is Tony, and I still have him to this day. And he's a great snake. But anyway, in college, I had a red-footed tortoise named Ty. And that's pretty much the only reptile that I kept during that time. But after 2 years at the University of Alabama, I left there to join the Army. So I had to go to 8 weeks of basic training, another 8 weeks to become a military police officer in the Army National Guard. And so that kind of shifted my life a lot. I went back home and I actually fell back in love with my corn snake Tony. And that's when I started getting more into reptiles, and I saw that there were people breeding them for a living and making money with it. So I decided that I was going to read more into it, and I was just an observer probably for a year or two. I had maybe 5 animals and slowly started learning about the industry and what kind of animals that I liked and wanted to get into. It is 2012 and all my training is done, and I actually go back to college. I go to SUNY Oswego in Oswego, New York, on Lake Ontario, basically the border of Canada, where it's just snowing constantly. Gave me a lot of time to educate myself, not only on the hobby, but on the animals, and getting some hands-on experience. That's when I started to really build out a collection. Now at the time, 2012, 2013, ball pythons were the big thing. And quite frankly, there were still morphs that were going for $20,000, $25,000, $50,000 even. And then we saw the scaleless head come out in 2014. And that was kind of a turning point in the market. So I basically did what everyone else was doing. I got into ball python morphs, and quite frankly, I was still a broke college kid with no money to his name, playing in a game where money was super important. It was super important to get on top and try to buy the most expensive morph you can so that you can benefit from that trickle down. It's basically a pyramid scheme, so I decided to hop right into it for some reason. And so I got the results that people get when you do things that everyone else is doing. And as a college kid, what I did to make money was I worked at a pool chemical. Ooh, that scared me, giant leaf. And what I did at that time was I worked at a pool company, and we sold pool chemicals and pool supplies on eBay and Amazon. And I was making a modest amount of money, probably like 10 bucks an hour. And I was saving every bit of it so that I could invest in ball pythons. And when I say invest, I mean like a pastel ball python for $200, that kind of thing. The prices were a little bit higher then, but also the results you could get were a bit lower because $200 would only get you something like a pastel or a spider. So what I did is I had a bunch of one gene animals, lesser spiders. You know, I did the bad things that everyone does in the beginning where I get too many males. Instead, you should be female heavy in the beginning because females take 3 years to get to maturity and males only take 2 in ball pythons. So it's always good to start off with a lot of females, and then the next year you can invest in your males and your powerhouse males to get the job done. Well, they can breed in like a year, so really you can do that the year before. But my ball python collection was, well, it wasn't exactly world class, but I started doing Facebook and stuff like that. I started getting my business out there. I produced a few clutches, and unfortunately what happened is that I started having animals get sick. And I was bringing in a lot of animals at the time. My collection was so young. Everything was, I probably had it for 6 to 12 months at the very most. Therefore, everything when it was quarantined was kept together because it needs to be quarantined for, you know, 4 to 6 months, and I had just gotten pretty much all my snakes in that time. So they're all pretty much in the same rack, stuff like that, and I started having snakes getting sick. And what happened is that I started running up vet bills, and at the time I didn't have almost any money to do this, but I spent something like $1,500 on the vet that first year. And we tried everything and we couldn't find out what was killing my snakes, and it kept on happening, kept on happening. We kept on doing necropsies, we kept on doing different kinds of antibiotics, antifungals, different weird stuff just to make it work. Even at one point I did some type of pig medicine that the barkers used back in the day. So I used that and nothing worked. So I became really disappointed in what was going on, and just a month or two earlier I had told my mom that I was going to drop out of college and start a reptile business. I was gonna breed ball pythons or breed whatever I could full time. And as you could imagine, my mom cried a lot because I was in college. I was there for marketing and business administration. I was supposed to go out and get a 9-to-5 job and make $50,000 a year but I realized just a few years later that that was probably some type of nidovirus going through my collection. And at the time, we didn't really know anything about nidovirus. There wasn't a test to figure it out. So quite frankly, I just had to watch a lot of my snakes die, probably about half my collection, some animals that I really loved. This sent me into definitely a dark place. There were definitely a lot of nights where I was literally crying because I had just dropped out of college. My mom was disappointed. My parents were like, what the hell are you doing? And here I have half of my collection die. So I have no money, no collection, and seemingly no possible way to achieve my dreams. So things got really weird, and I started actually building out my collection to different things. I realized that, hey, even if I don't do this as a business, I can work with things that I really love and I can really make an impact on this hobby. And that's when I started to get into, that's when I first got into the Louisiana Pine Snake Project. So I believe I got my first male in 2014, and that's when I really got into rarer stuff. Also just stuff that people don't keep that often. So I felt the Louisiana Pine Snake was something that was undervalued, and therefore I was glad to have some. And then I also got into things like Morelia. I got a carpet python, I got a water python, I got an olive python, all these different things to kind of round out my expertise as a reptile keeper, because I knew that I didn't want to keep ball pythons forever and only ball pythons, but I still had half of my collection. But just as I was going, I went to my first Tinley, stuff like that. I actually moved from Oswego to Colorado, and that was kind of spurred off of a relationship ending, and I had the opportunity to get out and do new things, so I moved to Colorado. So I sold everything I owned as well as a bunch of my ball pythons. So at the time when I went to Colorado, what I had in the car was I had the green tree python, the olive python, the water python, and the Louisiana Pine Snake Project, which was 3 snakes. So that's really when I was able to kind of start my collection over again. And of course I had Tony as well as our dog Dixie, and moved to Colorado and kept them basically. I had a one bedroom in a house, and none of my roommates knew I had snakes and kept them in the closet basically under wraps. But those are interesting times, and I'm glad that all those snakes did well moving across the country. In the next year, I ended up moving to Denver, and then after that, I ended up moving to Texas. So fast forward 2 or 3 years later, I believe it is 2016, and here I am in Dallas, Texas, and I'm starting over again. I had lost my dream. I had gone through a lot of rough times since I got out of college, and I was ready to get my dream back in a way. I should probably explain, when I was living in Colorado, none of the jobs that I had were very extravagant. My first job in Boulder was security officer, and I basically transported bodies to the morgue and did a bunch of crazy stuff and worked with mostly mental health patients and different type of restraining individuals and crazy stuff like that. And I was making about $17 an hour, so I really wasn't making much more than what to get by. And then after that, when I moved to Denver, I was actually a logistics broker where I was making $35,000 a year. When I was paying rent in Denver, I was barely making it by as well, and that's actually why I moved to Texas. So I moved to Texas. I still had that logistics job. I just switched offices, so I was able to continue that there. I moved in with one of my best friends, Ryan, and that's where really everything started. I started to get some corn snakes. Eventually decided that I had this in the back of my head that I wanted to start a podcast so long ago, and I finally got around to doing it. I just recorded it by myself, just me talking for like 10 minutes. It's probably terrible. You can go back and listen to it if you want, the first episode. And then I ended up bringing Melissa to do it with me, so she was my girlfriend probably like only 2 to 3 months prior to when we started the podcast, and all of a sudden she's in the podcast, which is crazy, right? So I ended up actually quitting that logistics job and doing Postmates full time. So that was, I put so many miles on my car. Not a very good idea on my part, to be honest. But one of the benefits of that job was actually that it gave me a lot of flexibility, and therefore I was able to put a bunch of time into whether it was acquiring snake, breeding snakes, learning about snakes. I saw these people who were successful in our space, and I said, so many of them are getting in the social media game. They have Instagrams, YouTubes, Facebook. This is what you have to do to market your animals and be successful in the industry, so I'm gonna do it. So I started YouTube, podcasts, all that stuff, and I just love being in touch with everyone in the reptile community. To be honest, there's been tough times, and the only way I would keep on going, I'm sure, is to have people like yourselves who are watching right now backing me, and that means the world to me. And shout out to our Patreon supporters. And the people that we've met through the podcast is just crazy, and people that I never thought I'd be able to meet. So that's just something that you really have to put yourself out there in order to get. But I'm so glad I did. I actually was in the Army that whole time. I was just switching units, switching states, which if anyone is in the National Guard, it's a real pain to do, but I did it 3 times somehow. And I actually got out after 6 years in May of 2018. So we got the bulk of our breeding collection in one foul swoop. It was actually after a guy was getting out of the hobby, at least out of corn snakes, because he had some health issues and he wanted to focus more on things like short-tailed pythons and blood pythons. So we ended up getting, I believe it was something around 15 animals, most of which being adult females. And I believe the number, we paid $2,200. And we didn't just pay $2,200 up front, we actually paid it on a payment plan, which ended up being, something like $600 for however many weeks. So we were able to get a really good start, and it was someone who paid particular attention to the quality of the animals and the quality of the morphs, and got all of his animals from really great breeders, and therefore we could really build our stock off of that. And you may be asking yourself, how did I fund all this? Because at the time I was only working Postmates, I wasn't making that much money. Well, I took a risk. I don't know if I would ever tell anyone else to do this, but quite frankly I had to use credit. So I had actually received my tax return, and I paid for my het palmettos on that tax return. Pretty much my whole tax return went to those animals. But as far as the meat of our collection, that was on a credit card. Even though I was young, didn't have great credit, Capital One will pretty much give a credit card to anyone with a pulse, and therefore I was able to get a credit card. Not only one, but two, and then so my credit line between both those credit cards was about $2,000, as well as eventually I built up credit through PayPal, and that is about $2,000. So altogether, I spent about $4,000 on starting my reptile breeding business. And now, it may be scary to go in debt, but quite frankly, sometimes you need to bet on yourself, and also there was just no other way for me to do it. So every single year I try to pay off that debt, and then I put it back on again and reinvest it into the business. So I'm not sure, I may change that up soon, but for now that's what I do. So that's a little bit of the financial side. Listen, the interest rates are really bad on the credit cards. It's not a good idea, don't do it, but it's what I had to do in the moment. So I was getting out of the Army, and Melissa was graduating with her master's degree, both in May of 2018. And so we decided that neither of us were from Texas. Our families, her family's in North Carolina, mine's in New York. Why don't we go somewhere in the middle? And we decided to move to Philadelphia. We had just had our first big season with corn snakes, and so we ended up actually moving once they hatched all out. I had to move all these fresh babies all the way from Dallas, Texas to Philadelphia, and not to mention we moved into a place and we had to move again right after. That's a whole different story for a different day, but that's how we landed exactly where we are now. And we've been keeping up the things like the podcast and the YouTube channel, and adding new things like doing springtails, which is something we added this year, which we sell on eBay, and that's actually just taken off. And we added things like t-shirts when we were still in Texas, and we've tried to diversify as much as possible our business. But that's pretty much how we built our business, taking risks, taking a little bit of debt, and quite frankly, $4,000 worth of debt isn't a lot for me to get out of. If I got a regular job, you know, making a mediocre wage, I could pay that off in a year easy, so it's not anything that I'm going crazy about. But it's a risk that you got to be willing to take sometimes. And I am not a full-time reptile breeder. I do other things. I had crazy part-time jobs. I still do a part-time job. So I actually have a retail job right now that I'm quitting because it's the bulk of the season and I don't have enough time right now. So I'm quitting that job, and I'll probably pick up another job if I have to in the winter. But hopefully our other aspects of our business can make up for our lull time there in the winter when we don't have babies anymore, because typically we sell out. So I gotta pick up a job or pick up more editing jobs and stuff like that. We're still grinding it out. We're still taking it day by day and just trying to make this all work, and I thank you all for being here. We've had so many ups and downs throughout this whole thing, and this season's going great, and I'm just so excited to see what happens in the future, and we've got some more things in store for us. Please, if you have any questions, please ask me below. Please comment on this. It really helps us out, as well as liking. So that is how I started my reptile business, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching.